friends. This is Rick, and this is your seat at the table. And Frankie, the shoulder cat, is mucking around by the door over there. You going out now? You'll be back. This is part of the Fortresses of Middle-earth series. Calenhad, yes, pronunciations, blah, blah. A beacon of Gondor. Now, I had to go back and look through my archives. I know I've done all of these once before. I wasn't sure if I'd done this one in this current revision with my down view, but if I have, so be it. One of the things about Gondor was it needed, even in its height, it wanted to stay connected with its far-flung frontier, and so to establish a form of control and a line of communications, they created these locations that were beacons. You know, they varied in their how elaborate they were and how well defended they were, but their placement was crucial. They needed to be within visual sight on most good weather days of another one to have an unbroken chain. And while in the books they're briefly mentioned, and we see a little bit more of an example in Jackson's Lord of the Rings, including the beacon that's in Minas Tirith, which isn't really mentioned in Tolkien's works itself. They built a line of these, and it's my understanding there were at least 7 that ran along the north side of the White Mountains, but there was also a series of these that were on the south side of the White Mountains that get very little press, if you will. But the idea was the same principle, that in times of trouble, they could be lit and summon the defenses in either direction. So in a case of, let's say, Rohan was invaded by Dunlendings and they needed Gondor's assistance, they could ride to the nearest beacon and request it. And in addition to sending out couriers, of course, the beacons would be lit and would appear in Minas Tirith, and then Gondor could react appropriately. And the same would go down south if the Corsairs invaded certain portions of southern Gondor along the coast. Potentially, they could summon aid from the northern provinces fairly reasonably quickly. Now, there's some speculation, fan fiction, things like this about the beacons being at their peak, at the peak of Gondor's power, or very early on in when Numra's influence is still very strong, even after its fall in Gondor. The possibility that some of these, if not all of these beacons, were magically lit. They had the suggestion that there might have been a bit more complexity to them than what we think of, given their ability to burn different kinds of elements to create colored smoke or colored flames, or magically enhanced in some manner. But for the most part, we're just looking at them as a normal concept of a beacon tower. Now, the most common beacon tower we know of in our modern world is a lighthouse. The principle is similar in the aspect the lighthouse is to warn ships at sea of a rocky or dangerous area of the coastline to stay away, or act as a beacon, as in, this is where the port is, come here, come this way. So the principle of communications on a large scale, I don't know that these ever was attempted in real world terms of having these something along these lines, but who knows, right? That's not what we're here. So this is a beacon of Gondor as part of the Fortresses of Middle-earth series, and I wish there had been more of these put out before Murph transitioned to the 2nd edition or 3rd edition material, and then eventually Ice lost the franchise, or however it played out. But because I've had some PDF files sent to me from a friend of some of the later dated stuff, and in one of those you will find most of the information to this booklet in that, which nothing necessarily a bad thing, but you know, anyway. So we got our contents. This was first printed in 1990, and this would be a first printing booklet, by the way, because I bought these things as they came out and showed up at my local game store. Fortress design, author designer named Tim Cook. So Tim Cook, if you're out there, awesome stuff. The Tale of Years. material for adapting this to your favorite fantasy game setting, conversion chart, bonuses, so on and so forth. It says here, a light kindled in the sky, a blaze of yellow fire behind a dark barrier. The Pippin cowered back, afraid for a moment, wondering into what dreadful country Gandalf was bearing him. He rubbed his eyes and saw it was the moon rising above the eastern shadows, now it was full. So the night was not yet old, and for hours the dark journey would still go on. Where are we, Gandalf? He asked. In the realm of Gondor, the wizard answered. The land of Anduin is still passing by. And then there was a silence for a while. Then, what is that? Cried Pippin suddenly, as clutching at Gandalf's cloak. Look, fire, a red fire. Are there dragons in this land? Look, there is another. For an answer, Gandalf cried out to his horse, On, Shadowfax. We must hasten. Time is short. See, the beacons of Gondor alight, calling for aid. War is kindled. So we have a small, brief 1800 Second Age. First Numerian settlers arrive in Gondor, displaying the indigenous lowlanders. Some 1,000 years later is the downfall of Numenor. 3320 Second Age realms in exile. Arnor and Gondor are founded. 3325, Dunlendings migrate to Dunlending and southern foothills of Hithagar. The Gondorians erect a chain of simple signal platforms to alert the local settlers to Danish movements to summon military aid if necessary. Orthanc is built during this period, the placement of Palantir and Isengard. Now that's a brief, unrelated note, but I was reading something for another video on planning, and it really kind of stuck in my mind. Even with the fall of Durbar, the fall of, and the destruction of the Dunedin's ancestral homeland and the settlement of Gondor and Arnor, they're still at the Numerians who settle in Arnor and Gondor are still at their peak of knowledge, craft, ability, etc., etc. The fact that they built Orthanc and Isengard after they settled, not before, not during the height of Numenor, but after Numenor's fall, is an indication of just how complex and how capable these folks were, and how far they slid down from and what the height of Numenor would have been like to behold and to interact with. It's just mind-boggling in some ways, right? It just shows that even in a mythical setting, a fictional setting, that a high civilization can rise, be established, thrive, and then disappear. There's some analogy to the possible ancient human civilizations that predate our known history. The tale the tale of Atlantis is definitely strong in the tale of Numenor and its fall, at least its fall part, the actual consumption of the island. So the fact is that the Numerian power base and its knowledge and everything has been on a gradual, slow decline, and it's taken millennia, and they're still considered high men in the age of the War of the Ring. But so much has passed, so much has been lost, so much has been subsumed and consumed by the history and time and the elements. This is one of the reasons that I have a strong belief in humanity's history being much deeper and richer and more complicated and convoluted than we can possibly imagine. And to think that modern civilization, or civilization period, human civilization only begins 5,000 years ago. And it just seemingly appears and accelerates after tens of millions of years of, quote, hunter-gatherers living hand to mouth and moving around in the wilderness. It just, my mind rebels against it. So, tale of years, third age, blah, blah, blah. Got a little bit of a blueprint. I think to notice that what we see in the movies is very crude. You see a little hut up on a high hilltop with what literally is a bonfire. Nothing more or nothing less. But it's implied that these are much more than than just a simple platform of wood. They start out this way, that's correct. But later they evolve into these fortifications. These areas that in the time period, like the Middle Ages, fortifications, castles, were key to maintaining and projecting control over an area far, far away from the true seat of power. These were a very valuable tool, and they served many purposes. A lot of them would see towns grow up around them, even cities grow up around them. But in this case, these are bastions of Gondor's power, of Gondor's control of the regions directly adjacent to what they call their homeland, and they serve. And not all the beacons are heavily developed, but or at least it's implied that, and it talks about it in the story. So we got the brief history of the beacons of Gondor, and I've already read some of that. Talks about the history, about the kin strife, how the beacons play their roles, the final roles that they play in the War of the Ring. And this is like here. In the latter half of the War of the Rings, the beacon tower at Avonsol was given the destruction of set alight its main fire, signaling that aid was desperately needed in the city of the Guard. In the movie, it's Gandalf and Pippin set it up, turn them on, and Dinther didn't. But in the books, Dinther issued an order. The beacon tower were lit. However, the schemes of Sauron had been successful. This avenue aid would have been long denied the southern kingdom. While the attention of Dinther was turned eastward, the threat of Mordor across Anduin and west towards Rivendell, the fortunes of his son Boromir, the towers were forced again and again to repel assaults by orcs striking from Mordor and the Misty Mountains. If any of these towers had fallen, Gondor's dire plight would have been taken longer to reach the ears of Theoden, and precious time would have been lost. As Sauron failed and beacon towers were able to carry out their primary functions successfully, resulting in the now legendary right of the Rohirrim to the gates of Minas Tirith. So later, some of these towers were attacked by an army of orcs that lay in ambush for the riders of Rohan. After the downfall of the Lord of the Rings, the new kings of Rohan and Gondor again traveled the tower of Halfirin on the Rohan of the spot of Eladil's Hallow, and renew the oath of Orel. Beacons play a vital role in the decisive actions again at the end of the Third Age, and their strategic importance did not go unnoticed. King Essler ordered all 7 towers repaired and expanded, resulting in a chain of stalwart fortresses running north and west out of Minas Tirith. Surrounding, so we're talking this particular Calenhad, the beacon of Gondor. The surrounding lands, Calenhad, small town, are always approximately 30 miles northeast of Calenhad and 12 miles north of the Min Rimmon. The Great North Road passes through the village. The typical village is what we're getting at. The layout, Greywood, Manor, Fordelen, yeah. Wealthy Dune made his fortune in Minas Tirith, retired the country manor of his family. The estate lays a few miles west of Cullost, on the south side of the Green North Road. Price little piece of it. History of Calenhad. It says, Fortress of Calenhad is in the foothills of the Ered Nimrais. Calenhad is the 6th beacon tower from Minas Tirith, standing approximately 150 miles west by north of the city of Guard. It is located just off the Great North Road, which runs between Gondor and its successor kingdoms of Arnor, and dominates the surrounding lands of its majestic walls. Of all the beacon towers, this one is the largest and most heavily defended. Shining beacon can be seen on a clear night as far away as 12 leagues. That's roughly 36 miles. Well within sight of the neighboring towers of Halifrin and Min Rimmon. Created by master architects from Minas Tirith, the stonework of the beacons is unrivaled in western Anorian, overshadowed only by the huge citadel of Orthanc to the west and the major cities of Gondor to the east. Right, a little bit there. So, history, another blueprint of the schematics, the layout, the fortress, the outer bailey, the gatehouse. So we break down the individual items, their locations and functions. I hear you rustling around there somewhere. Where you at, Frankie? Mill Bailey. See, a nice detail breakdown, and I find these useful because, like I said, I can be a lazy Jim, and sometimes at some points, back in the day I would consumed by hand creating everything, but now as I got older, it's just more convenient to borrow, unless it's very pertinent to a story or a campaign, just to borrow. And this is an excellent one for a small fortress or a small frontier, what have you. There's a guy, very excellent. That'd be nice if it was in color and you could put it on a wall. Inner Bailey, wall towers, stables, the smithy, beacon tower. Keeping in mind that not only did the beacon towers serve a primary purpose of communication in and among themselves, they also serve as way stations. Many of them do. A place for the Gondorian version of the Pony Express to have a safe place to keep replacement mounts and to hold up and resupply or replenish or rest and recover if need be, and or to swap the knowledge or the whatever the message is to the next messenger and send them on out along the chain. So most of these places, the larger ones, this is why I find that what we see in Peter Jackson's version is effective for the movie perspective, but probably very unrealistic unless that was just a piece of a much larger complex. Because I think these would be more appropriate for something for a country as well developed with such a deep history as Gondor. To have such crude beacon places like we see in the movies doesn't seem right. What we see, Jackson's version of the beacon in Minas Tirith should have also been projected on the ones furthest out, instead of just showing a crude hut with a couple figures huddling under their cloaks and waiting to light a big bonfire. In the earliest days, that's exactly how I envisioned that they looked. But after several thousand years of Gondorian success and wealth and just the development of time, these things should have been much more elaborate, much more complex, much more fortress-like than what we see in the movies. Now, it's not to say that they couldn't have been run down or dilapidated or even a ruin if necessary, as long as the function of the beacon still worked. But that's, I guess, neither here nor there. Just me. Or the beacon tower itself, various quarters, locations inward, blueprints. Just goes to show you how extensive this particular one. Now we get to a section, or chapter 6. This is the evolution of the beacon towers. So we start out from something very crude. Even by their standards, this is a crude location from the earliest days of the settlement of Gondor, maybe just prior to it. So the second age 3325, the third age 490, it's just basically a signal platform with some soldiers to keep an eye on it. Right? And even this is much more complicated or complex looking than what we see in Jackson's movie. And so this is why I base my concept that Jackson dropped the bar a hair. It still served its purpose. It still functioned. It was low budget, if that's what you want to look at. But in reality, I would follow this and this evolution of much bigger and stronger things over time based on the importance these sites play in Gondor's defense and communication. Just my argument for it. We've got our garrison, basically who's here, what their functions are, rough numbers of the government. And I imagine the garrisons, like all times, fluctuated up and down based on the needs of the times, the situation, and Gondor's strength. So towards the War of the Ring, Gondor's forces are strained and they're thin. They are just a shadow of their glory days of 1,000-odd years before, and so to have a handful of people, even 2 people, sitting there watching this platform 24/7 is not unreasonable. Probably more likely than to have a fortress full of people, although it's implied here in the book that there still was a garrison, and they were, as it says in the stories, were under pressure from outlying orcs and contingents that were sent against them by Sauron's minions with the intent of disrupting that communications and or delaying it as much as they could, and they ultimately failed because the Rohirrim came. And in truth, the Rohirrim were going to come anyway. Gondor and Gandalf had been there, and Gondor and Aragorn was still there, and he still pushed Rohan to right. And I think Theoden would have done this without the red arrow or the courier or the lighting of the beacons. It's just the lighting. The beacons is a dramatic thing. It's not been done in his lifetime. To see them actually in action spurs on the Rohirrim. It adds to the urgency to get to Gondor as fast as possible, instead of tarrying and taking their time and gathering even more forces. If you think for a brief moment, that actually plays a critical role in how the outcome of the Battle of Pelennor Fields could have taken place. And what I mean by that is Theoden orders the mustering of Rohan, the Rohirrim at Dunharrow, as many people can get there as in a allotted amount of time as possible. And even it's this concept strengthened and reminded even as they arrive, and Theoden's calling out to the various chieftain captains that he acknowledges and is muttering few to few, and we don't see these people and those people. Those people could have brought more people. Well, there was a time constraint. Theoden had X amount of time to get to Gondor, or it would have been pointless. If he had arrived a day late and Sauron's forces had succeeded or completely cut off any chance of getting to Minas Tirith, then at best they're going to be harassing the borders or the outer lying pickets of Sauron's forces. At worst case scenario, this allows the core elements of Sauron's army, especially its mounted divisions, to swing around and take on the Rohirrim head-on, unaided. The Rohirrim were riding to their death. They acknowledged it was a bonsai charge, and it was just by audacity, skill, determination, and the timely arrival of reinforcements from Gondor, both from the elements that Aragorn brings forth from the south, and the ride of Prince Amith, of Dol Amroth, and the knights and associated other mounted individuals in Minas Tirith, which there weren't a huge amount of. But they struck at the key point and a key moment that had the most impact on the battle, and began the turn of the tide. The battle itself begins to disintegrate in the favor of the defenders, not the attackers. And it's important when you look at the sheer volume. It's reported roughly 80,000 troops under Sauron's border were in the field in and around Minas Tirith, and additional forces were backed up along the roads to Mordor and further north. And a lot of these contingents were spread out. This is one of the reasons that Theoden doesn't wait for an entire muster to achieve. He expected to have a lot more spears than he did. But the fact that those spears were tied up elsewhere, defending their homes and their territories and fighting for their lives, plays out in the long run, because it protects Rohan from being decimated by these rogue elements of Sauron who are out rampaging in the hinterlands, as well as tying down more of Sauron's forces and denying that active amount of men and material, if you will, could have been surged forward toward Minas Tirith when it became apparent that they were going to lose the battle in that location. Just my thought. So we have Second Age Adventures, Third Age Adventures, Fourth Age Adventures, Master Garrison table, NPC table, so on and so forth. Once again, I like these because they're easily converted over to my Dungeons and Dragons go-to, and I can utilize these as NPCs on a hit, on a moment's notice. Just me. So product listing, right? So there you have it. From the Fortresses of Middle Earth, a beacon of Gondor.